Velkommen til anden del af vores Life Science Investor konference, som har foregået over både onsdag og torsdag den 21. og 22. april 2021. Vi skal i dag en tur til Uppsala, hvor Qlinea holder til. Under covid-19 er vi ikke tvunget til, men så må vi i stedet for lave konferencen via Zoom. Så jeg vil gerne have lov til at benytte lejligheden til at byde velkommen til deres CEO, som er Jonas Jarvius.
Thank you very much. Also glad to be here to present to you all today. I also have my colleague Anders Lundin, who is the Chief Financial Officer for Qlinea. As you know, we are in a quiet period, so we may not be able to answer any detailed financial questions. But if there are high-level questions, Anna will be here at the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So let's get going. We start to show our disclaimer slide in case me or Anders would make any forward-looking statements. It's obligatory, but I suggest we get moving right on into the presentation. So Qlinea is a company working with disruptive solutions for improving infectious disease diagnostics. This is a huge unmet need, has been presented as the biggest threat for mankind, so it's a very important area. We are based in Sweden, in Uppsala, and you can see our 3 facilities in the top of the image. We have our headquarters to the left. We have our marketing and commercial office in the middle, where we can present our STAR, perform demonstrations. Of course, now under the Corona difficult times and pandemic, this is difficult, but we wait to be able to do that again as soon as the world opens up. And to the furthest right, you can see our production facility for consumables. So we have a 400 square meter clean room facility for in-house production of consumables. What I'm going to talk about today is ASTar, our lead product, as you can see here on the main screen. And as you perhaps saw, if you have been following us, we signed a worldwide commercial agreement with Thermo Fisher Scientific last year, and we'll together with Thermo Fisher now take the product to market. We are a little bit over 140 employees and consultants in the company. And as you can see, we had a very, very strong first quarter. We are in the very final stage of the CE marking or clinical studies for ASTar. We have presented some very strong indicative data from the study. We have also received the first commercial order from Thermo Fisher Scientific, already well advanced before the launch. And of course, the reason here is to be prepared with pre-market activities and be ready to go out to customers as soon as we have the CE mark. We've also announced that we've started the preparation and signed the first contract for the US study that we're also planning on moving. But if we move into the key areas where we focus our product, or our first product, this is sepsis. It's a bloodstream infection, and it's really an overreaction of your own immune system to an infection somewhere in the body. So you may have a wound in your skin, you might have a pneumonia, for instance, and in certain cases, bacteria leak out into the bloodstream, and then your immune system can overreact so dramatically that it actually starts shutting down your internal bodies, and that could lead to severe organ failure and also death. It is a common problem. It's the leading cause of death in our hospitals. It's more common than the 3 most common causes of or forms of cancer, and it generates takes more lives than those cancers. That equates to 500,000 people in Europe and US every year that will die from sepsis. And if we look worldwide, every 3rd second a person will die from sepsis. So this is a huge problem. The other problem is that we're lacking diagnostics or rapid diagnostics. And of course, you treat sepsis with antibiotics to treat the underlying infection. Today, we do that empirically, meaning you do your best guess as a physician and you start your therapy. But as it turns out, around 50% of all therapy for septic patients are inappropriate. And even worse, 20% of the patient will have died before you actually know what antibiotic to use. And this is really where Qlinea comes in. And I would show some data from independent health economic studies that really shows the importance of rapid diagnostics for sepsis. But apart from that, knowing what antibiotic to use to treat infection can help reduce one of the biggest problems we have in threatening of mankind, and that's antimicrobial resistance. You hear more and more about it, and here it's a clear need to have rapid diagnostics to much, much faster put appropriate treatment to that specific infections. The second problem we have is we see this increase in resistant bacteria, and we are lacking more and more treatment options for those bacteria. So in 2016 in Europe, around 700,000 people died from untreatable infections. But if you look a number of years ahead, around 2050, the current estimates today is we'll see 10 million people die because we can't treat their infections. So again, rapid diagnostics for antibiotic acceptability is of key importance today and for the future. If we then look at the market for Astar product, as I mentioned, we focus on sepsis, bloodstream infection first. We can see that we have in the main geography some 17 million tests annually, and that correlates to well over $1 billion addressable market annually. But then, of course, we have not designed Astar to work only with blood samples. We have already tested urinary tract samples and isolate samples, and we can see that together we see a multi-billion-dollar addressable market for these products in the future, and it's a big unmet need. If we then look at the workflow, you can see on the top part of this picture the traditional workflow for treating septic patients today. I will not go into the detail, we have a short presentation, but you can see it's a multi-day process spanning over 3-4 days. And every gray circle means that the hospital staff needs to do something with the sample, often manually. So it's also a multi-step process. And as I mentioned in the beginning, you can see you start therapy, of course, day one. And then in this case, you see the green circle. That's when you know what antibiotic to use to treat that patient infection. And the problem again is that 20% of the patient will have died. And of course, for the treating physician, that means that they will put their best effort in treating the patient will die, and then a day after you will have the results of what you should have treated. So it's a big, big problem for the physicians and of course detrimental to the patients. And this is where Astar comes in. So if you look at the bottom part of this image, you can see that we dramatically remove the number of steps needed to be performed by the staff, and we dramatically remove times. So we can provide optimized treatment much, much faster, and I'll come back to that. So we have tested this system, of course. Now we're at the end stage of the clinical studies, but we have done beta testing of the system last year. This is one testimonial from the University Hospital of Uppsala, headed by Dr. Ehsan Gaderi. And he really saw the benefit of the system. It was so super easy to use. Anyone could run a sample at any given time point, and it was much faster and provided a broader answer. So you can visit our webpage and see more of these testimonials. But it's really a very simple step procedure. It takes less than a minute. And also the instrument guides you using a graphical interface on all the steps. So it's a very, very short training period for staff to use Astar. If we then look at the benefits of providing rapid diagnostics, and these are independent health economic studies that have looked into the effects of 24-hour faster diagnostics. The most, I would say, not surprising perhaps, but striking is the lower mortality. So you can see you can have a dramatic reduction in mortality by providing the right treatment faster. Secondly, if you also can go from the broad spectrum initial impaired therapy, you can find a narrow spectrum therapy, and that also reduces the pressure for these opportunistic drug-resistant bacteria. And that's a huge saver for lives, but also for money. C. diff, as I mentioned here, costs around $1.5 billion in the US healthcare system annually. Then, of course, we have also seen that providing the right treatment faster means that the patient can leave the intensive care beds, expensive beds, you have a staff of physicians around you, and on average, you can save 2 days and actually have the patient be resigned to regular dorm. And these will have a dramatic cost saving for the hospitals. So Astar can provide 24 to 40 hours faster treatment. So you might actually see further improvement to these type of studies. But you can clearly see you have an impact on the patient, on the society, and on the hospital. So there are key drivers for every stakeholders to implement rapid diagnostics. I will present a case that we did last year in the beta testing of Astar, where you can see what importance rapid diagnostic can have for patients with severe infections. This particular example is for a 73-year-old man. He had a surgery or neurosurgery, and then he was diagnosed with aspiration pneumonia. So you can see on the following treatment track with the arrows below that he was put on cefotaxime immediately. And then you can see all the necessary time points in the traditional lab at Uppsala University Hospital. You could see that the sample was flagged positive day 2. You performed a gram stain. And then, of course, at that time point, we could also load the sample immediately into ASTar. And ASTar could then report within the same day that this particular bacteria was resistant towards cefotaxime. Of course, at that time, ASTar was not CE marked, so this was more of a monitoring study. But the next day, this was confirmed. And this is a clear example that the outcome for this particular patient could have been dramatically changed with implementation of rapid diagnostics. Another benefit here was, apart from being faster, ASTar provided results on 10 more antimicrobials compared to the standard practice at Uppsala University Hospital. So it also gives you a broader repertoire on how to treat or tailor the treatment for any specific patient. So this is just one example of the needs and benefits of rapid diagnostics. If we then look at the market, our colleagues or competitors in the field, we divide the field in basically 2 big buckets. We have rapid AST and we have traditional AST. Within rapid AST, we subdivide it into fully automated, such as ASTar, very easy to use. And then we have semi-automated, which means that the lab staff typically need to do sample preparation, perhaps adjust concentration of the sample before you do AST. We have truly built ASTar as a platform, so we can actually deliver results in all these 3 categories. But of course, the high value, the fully automated, is our first product. And if we look at the competitors in that field, there's typically 2 companies that we have been following for the last number of years. It's Accelerate Diagnostics, a US company, and Quantum Matrix, a Korean company. And of course, if we look at the traditional field, we have the big 4 players really taking around 25% each market share. And as I mentioned, we have now signed a worldwide contract with Thermo Fisher Scientific, one of the strongest player in this field. In the middle section here, when we look at this semi-automated workflow, we typically follow 20, 25 companies with various parts of rapid AST. But as I said, Qlinea is really focusing on the high-value patients, although we can be present in all these categories. If we then look at our value proposition, how that compares really to our colleagues in the field. Well, first of all, it's super easy to use, less than a minute hands-on time. And we also built the system to have a load and go workflow. That means that we can have 12 samples simultaneously running in the system. And as soon as we have free capacity, you can load a sample. That's what's called random access. And that really is to have the highest flexibility for the lab. It's also fast, within 6 hours for blood cultures. For urinary tract samples, we have demonstrated data below 45 minutes. So it's really coupled to the sample and the bug-drug combination. As I mentioned, high throughput running up to 12 patient samples. But we also build a very comprehensive panel. So we look at very large concentration of antibiotics and very many antibiotics. We can also include all types of bacteria, gram-negative, gram-positive, fastidious and non-fastidious. And we have built the system to support additional samples, such as urine, such as isolates. So we really see it's a strong platform that we can launch further menu expansion on in the future. It's also very accurate. We actually provide the highest precision value you can have in these type of tests. It's called the minimum inhibitory concentration, the MIC value. That's a concentration that kill or inhibit bacterial growth. And we provide that with a very high reproducibility as well. So if we then look at some of the data, as you saw, we just announced the indicative data for the clinical study, extremely strong. But before, of course, that we have been testing the system on similar settings for a long period of time with very, very many combination of bacteria and antibiotics. Really, you have 2 requirements that you need to meet in Europe and US. One is called essential agreement. That's basically that you provide the same concentration that kill or inhibit bacteria. You need to be about 90% in Europe and US. And we have been well above that before and also in the indicative part of the study. Then you have the categorical agreement, and that's typically for a general practitioner where you will receive 3 categories for treatment: sensitive, intermediate, or resistant, to be able to choose your treatment. Again, you need to be above 90% Europe and US, and also in these studies, we have been well above those guidelines in order to have the product approved. And as you may know, in Europe today, we are self-certified. So as soon as we tick the last box of the study, we can claim CE mark and then launch the product. If we then talk to Thermo Fisher, our selected partner, The reason we chose Thermo Fisher, we actually had options. We had more than one at the negotiation table that really wanted to take our product out to the mass market. But I think one key with Thermo Fisher is that they really share our vision on what's needed to transform this care in the future. What technology, what methods are needed to really make a better outcome for these patients. We share that. If we look at the partnership as such, it's a mutual exclusivity agreement, meaning that we have selected Thermo Fisher to be our sales partner, and they have selected Qlinea as their rapid AST provider. But it's also a partnership. It's not a distributionship. So we will share all data, meaning that we will have access to all customers visited by Thermo Fisher, all installed systems. And this is really key to me, to be able to continue to develop the customer relation, continue to develop the system for the future. So that was really a prerequisite before we signed the contract. We will, of course, also sell ASTar in Sweden. That's our home market. And it gives you a very strong and close connection to the customers. So where are we right now? Well, we are working at full pace in both organizations, doing pre-market activities, selecting potential first customers, having discussions. We're, of course, also training a lot of personnel, service engineers, and application specialists, sales personnel. And of course, we do it electronically today because of the corona pandemic. But we have known Thermo Fisher for quite a number of years, and it works really good in our partnership. So I think this is really holds a good promise for the future. But I would like just to mention, say that Qlinea is more than ASTar. We have today 23 patent families within the company covering more technologies than ASTar. As you see in this image, we are focusing on ASTar, of course, planning for future menu expansion. But we could also announce, end of last year, our next product in development. It's the world's first portable blood culture technology, and I'll describe a little bit more about that. And then we have Astrid and Astrea platforms that we think could be good in a 5 to 7 year perspective. But I will not talk about them now, but just give a couple of highlights on our portable technology for blood culturing. Today, you send blood cultures to a reference lab. So typically a microbiology lab where you have blood cultures initiated. This means that every sample needs to be collected either at the hospital or at the satellite hospital. They then need to send it to the lab. This is stated by regulations to take no more than 2 hours because of the urgency of septic patients. But because of logistic problems, it typically takes sometimes 10, 12, 14 hours for that sample to come into the microbiology lab. And that is 10 to 14 hours wasted. Nothing happens to the sample during that time. It's first when it comes into the lab, when you start incubation, that the diagnostic starts. So our portable technology instead moves that capacity out to the site of sampling. So as soon as you've taken the sample from the patient, you put it into this thermos-like, I would say, product, and then immediately you start incubating the sample, reading the sample. And this means really that you can provide equal and better care for everyone. You can dramatically reduce time to results for this important patient group. And we have seen from technical evaluation, you can see the graph on the lower part of the screen, where we compare our technologies just from the growth phase with the fastest cabinets on the market today. So we are, in this case, actually even a little bit faster than the cabinets, but then, of course, we take use of all the transportation time that today is wasted. So when we look at this, we see that as a very interesting product that we're now into developing and are planning to come commercial with coming forward. And when we look at the market for culturing technology, we know that in Europe and US, we have 160 million blood cultures taken from patients. That's corresponding to around a billion-sized population, and we know that 500 million dies. Of course, we see that other geographic expansion of regions can have similar problems. And if we just look at Asia, Pacific, or rest of the world, we see that there's a large potential unmet need here. But just focusing on Europe and US, we can see the size of a market of around $1.5 billion US, and of course, even further help saving lives. So with that, I would just like to say thank you for my presentation, and I will open up to any questions to me or Anders. Thank you very much.
Now we are ready for questions. And for this, we have gathered 3 very dedicated analysts from our newsletter. Is Lars Hatholt, Morten Larsen, and our editor-in-chief, Sten Albrechtsen. and I will suggest that Lars will begin.
Thank you for a very good presentation, a nice presentation. It seems to be a very good product that you have developed here. What I'm thinking about is your clients, you know, I mean, when we are talking about sepsis, I mean, the symptoms are rather dull, you could say. You don't have very clear symptoms when a patient has got sepsis. So I suppose that the patients that you're focusing on with this equipment here is hospitalized patients. Is that right? Could you put a little color on your clients, you could say, with your product?
Of course I can. That's a very good question. Yeah, this is correct. So the first product, and what you see with septic patients is you have really a two-tiered scheme. Today, it is very difficult to diagnose the patient with sepsis. We used to use SIR scores a number of years ago. Now we have moved to the SOFA scores. So that's the first classification you do as a physician. Then you take the blood culture sample on that. And typically from 100 patients, you will see 10 to 50% of them, or a little bit more sometimes, will then present a positive blood cultures. And of course, ASTar is focusing on all these positive blood cultures. So you know that when the sample is positive, meaning the patient already have bacteria in the blood, and then you immediately can start the analysis. Then, of course, you have patients that might not express bacteria in the blood and so on, but we basically tag on to the current diagnostic workflow with our product. So for our customers, they know that a positive blood culture means that the patient have bacteria in the blood. So it is hospitalized patients. But of course, when you see it, you have, of course, a number of community patients coming in, having the blood culture taken, and then you wait for a positive result. So in that case, we, with the first product, do not have to face this triaging of the patient. As you saw on our earlier slide, we had another system in development called Astrid, which is more the first line, really moving that diagnostic to the same day. We have already presented data on that platform, but for many of the good reasons you mentioned, we have now focused full on with ASTar. So we are looking also at that patient group, but today there are confirmed septic patients that are being analyzed in ASTar.
Okay, and if you look at the competition, I mean, the standard procedure for diagnosing sepsis, I suppose that's the measurement of CRP, right? Mm. Are there any competition? I'm sorry, I was unlocked from. I had a problem with my connection here, so maybe I haven't heard that. So maybe you touched upon that, but what I'm thinking about is that. Are there any competition in the market when we're talking about this kind of product, or do you expect that there could come some new competitors into the market in this field?
Right, yeah, so I did show some competitor overview. When we look at automated susceptibility testing, I mean, telling what antibiotic to use to treat a specific infection, there really are three companies that I see. It's Qlinea, of course, obviously. We have a US company called Accelerate Diagnostics and a Korean company called Quantametrics. We all deliver a fully automated solution to this. And when you compare and look at our product versus our colleagues or future competitors, I would say that what separates us is we provide true MIC, meaning the exact concentration that kill or inhibit bacteria. And we do that with a very broad panel, meaning that you can look at many different antibiotics and also very large concentration ranges. And we also do that in a high throughput fashion, really. So there are competitors out there, but we are still very few that has really taken all the steps to develop a fully automated solution. And I personally think that ASTar will stand very strong in that field. And when we look at the market today, some 17 million positive blood cultures that are sort of lacking rapid diagnostic today, it's a very big market to address for us and our colleagues.
Okay, and regarding your collaboration with Thermo Fisher, that's a mutual exclusive deal, I can understand. What about the split, the revenue split with this company? Could you say something about that, or is that confidential?
Yes, it's under confidentiality. I can first answer your first part. So it is exclusive for ASTar. So all other products we have in development or IP around was excluded from that deal. And the reason for that is, of course, we wanted to make the absolute best for Qlinea, our company, our shareholders, to really see that what's the best business solution for all our future products. Of course, Thermo Fisher will be on the top of the list. We have a very good collaboration, but we want to have flexibility. So that's one part. The other part is when we look at the type of revenue split, so to speak. I cannot really disclose that, but what I can say is that as soon as you see our quarterly reports coming out here, I think that it will become much clearer on how that looks like. And also, as we could mention in the press release, is they have binding orders, but they also have an upfront payment for the next 6-month period. So in that sense, it gives us a little bit stability and production planning, and it also gives sort of them their commitment to the product. So I think that will become clearer over the next quarters coming up here on exactly how that financially will look like.
Okay, and if I may have a last question here, maybe I missed that because I was disconnected. Maybe you have touched upon that, but as I could understand, there are quite a lot of quite a significant cost saving by using this product, right? What about the pricing of this product then? Could you touch a little bit upon, give a little color on this, put a color on this? So what the price range for this kind of product?
Yeah, so what I can say, first of all, I mean, we have not announced the exact pricing yet. That will come when we do the launch of the product. But in general, I can say, so of course, Thermo Fisher will decide their pricing for really the rest of the world, and Qlinea for Sweden. So we are separate there. But when we look in history, we have seen Accelerate Diagnostics. They had a price point around 220, 250 euros for the kit. When we earlier did pricing analysis with customers, we could see really that for the customers to run every single sample, of course, you need a high capacity system, which ASTar provides. We also get a sense that the sweet spot of pricing is lower than that price point, so that you don't select sort of the most sick patient, because every patient with bacteria in the blood is a severe sick patient. So our thinking in price point and feedback from customers is really that we want to find a price where you can motivate run every single positive blood culture in the system. And we are not far away from launch. We are really in the last stage of preparation. So we will be able to share that information shortly, most likely. But we see a different price point than we have seen in the market before, and we think it should be lower.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'll hand the microphone over to the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Hey, Morten here. I would like to follow up on Lars's questions around Thermo Fisher, because having looked at sort of the medical device space for quite a while, there's quite a few landmines out there, or stories around interesting technologies being handed over to partners, and then nothing has happened commercially.
Right.
I want to push on why you believe that Thermo Fisher is so hooked up. What have you seen so far? What is your act? What kind of strategies have you put in place to ensure that they are fully committed to this? To the same degree you are.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Of course, when you decide a commercial strategy, we look in the field. There are some good examples and bad examples of a small company partnering with a big one. I think what's really positive for us is that, first of all, when we have been talking to all the big four players, we wanted to have that strategy. We have had deep discussions with all of them. And really, when we entered negotiation, we had two of the biggest companies in the world that both expressed that they really wanted to launch our product. ASTar is a unique product, and it's a big unmet need. And of course, for us, that really brings the value of knowing that you have two big companies that want to do that. That puts us in a better negotiation position, apart from just talking to one partner. So without being able to disclose sort of the details of the contract, you can imagine that when you are in that type of position, of course, you would like to put things into the agreement to keep the focus on, keep sort of the attention onto the company, to keep that position. So I think we have a very strong contract. I would like to disclose more, but I'm not at liberty to do so. But I think secondly, more importantly, is that We have been knowing Thermo Fisher for 3-4 years. From when we first sort of started developing and going forward. And what you have seen Thermo Fisher do, and perhaps also now under this big corona pandemic, is that they have a strong focus. And I think they, all the way, from Mark Casper's vision on what's needed here, is very much aligned with our vision. And I think that's a very good position to have, that you at least think and believe that the same things are required to transform the field in this regard. So I would say there are two things: a high motivation from the entire team, and we have very great support and feedback from now when we have training sessions with sales personnel, service engineers. It's really a big drive to come close with Astar, but also the contractual part of it, which I think is very strong. So as you say, nothing is guaranteed, nothing is certain, but all I have seen in the commitment from Thermo Fisher and the engagement is really just adds to the positive side of that relationship. So I think we are in a good place. And of course, the future will tell naturally, but I'm looking very positive on the future now with the upcoming launch and going forward.
I would like to go a little bit deeper just on this one. Will you be putting in any of your own sales reps in to educate the Thermo Fisher reps and help them in their markets? And can you talk about what kind of economics there is for the Thermo Fisher reps in pushing this? What kind of margins will Thermo Fisher expect to earn on this kind of product? It's of course sensitive, but it's one of these things where you have seen failures in the past.
Right. Now, what I can say, first of all, as I said, it's a partnership. It's not a distributionship. And this was absolutely required for us. When we started developing Astar, we connected to a lot of hospitals in Europe and US. We have been very close to these hospitals, and they've been part throughout the development of Astar, doing a lot of usability studies, have important feedback on the panel, on workflow and so on. And of course, that stays the same. So every single customer that Thermo Fisher will address, will talk to, Qlinea have 100% access to that. So as soon as the customer expands from Thermo Fisher side, we will also have an expanded customer network. We are also have the possibility to help in the early sales. Today we are the one that knows the system best. We can participate in early sales, participate with technical experts. So, and I think this is a very important part for the future, to really glue the organizations together. But I think importantly for Qlinea to have that expanded customer base, so we can see what do we need to change in the system to make it even better? How should the next panel look like? What will be the next product? So I think that's best. And that's very, I would say, unusual. Typically when you see companies of our size signing contract with one of these big players, you have a sales distribution ship, meaning that you will receive money and you ship out system, but then you really don't know anything else. And I think that's a very dangerous track to go down. So I think having this full access to the customers is really important. On the second part of the question, looking at the financials, I cannot comment on that now, but what I can comment on is that when we started this negotiation, we started with the microbiology division within Thermo Fisher, of course, one of these big pillars in the organization. And as the contract developed and matured and we came into the financing part of the part, it actually moved up to the highest level in corporate in Thermo Fisher. And that typically happens for two reasons. One, the financial is interesting enough to do so or require them to be moved up. And of course, the general interest in the technology from strategic reason is there. So in order to be successful, Thermo Fisher needs to make money, and of course, we need to make money. So I think that when you saw that elevation to really the corporate level, that was a good sign. And I do truly hope and see how over the next month or years that you can start seeing a little bit on how the various parts of the revenue will come to Qlinea and to Thermo Fisher. But I'm sorry, I can't give any more details today.
Oh, but it's a very good answer you give, actually. Just a couple of add-ons here. Can you talk about the margins in the consumables versus the machines?
Yeah, so typically when you look at these products, we're very close to razor blade. You typically make money on all parts, and for the instruments you make money from just traditional sales, but also from service contracts. But you see generally much stronger margin on the consumables. These are really the driver for the business. and the instrument you typically accept quite a bit lower margin because they are really the foundation to drive consumable revenue. So I would say that if you look at us from the outside, we would look similar on margins from that perspective as you would with any type of similar product. So it's truly the focus on consumables. And that's also why we have decided early on to have in-house production of consumables to really control and be able to invest in that workflow. So that's a reason for that.
I'm going to allow myself a few more questions, if I may, given no one stops me. Could you talk about sort of here pre-commercialization? I guess a lot of work goes into identifying the sales funnels and the first clients that you have out there. How would you describe sort of this initial sales funnel you're seeing, and in terms of your level of engagement with the first clients so far?
Yeah. So first of all, I can say we have a very strong feedback or response from early clients. But I look at Qlinea, and I always plan for us to be the most successful company long term. I really want us to be the best infectious disease diagnostic company over the next 5-10 years. So when I see the launch, I want to see a controlled first phase. So you typically sell the systems to customers which are running a medium-sized or large-sized lab, really the sweet spot of our customer base. There should also be key opinion leaders, being experienced in the field, and perhaps also bring some weight to the system if it performs according to expectations. So I personally would like to see a controlled first phase, maybe 6 months, where you really more or less handpick customer, not necessarily sell systems to everyone that would like to have a system to test. And I think that's important because it's still a new platform, and we really want to make sure that we and Thermo Fisher are well suited to go down to really press on the gas pedal, so to speak, for the second stage of launching, and really make sure that the system performs up to the specifications, the customer are happy. Most likely, if everything goes well, we can also have some good statements, as also we have now from, for instance, Esan Gadieri and others that have tested the system and say that, well, it's super simple. I can actually have my staff perform much more work now because I spend less time on blood cultures, and at the same time provide a faster answer on more antibiotics. So I would say that segmentation of the first customer would probably fall in that type of category. Of course, Thermo Fisher have their own priority, and they will decide, but we have a very close relationship, and I think we are all in it to make a very successful launch of the system. So I'm not sure if I answered exactly on the question, but that's really how we think about it. And of course, we have been mapping and talking to a lot of customers, either ourselves or Thermo Fisher. So I think there's a fairly large interested customer base for the second sort of stage of the launch.
How many units do you think any one given hospital will need?
Yeah, so when we build ASTar, we actually build it with a very high capacity, and we did that for 2 reasons. First of all, we aim for the medium-sized and up hospitals, so 500 bed and up. And reason for that, if you look at the US market, for instance, you have some 6,000 hospitals in the US, maybe a little bit more, but you typically have around 1,500 of these larger hospitals that run 90% of the blood volumes because you have a lot of hub and spoke arrangements. So we wanted to have a capacity and a throughput to meet those customers. If we look at Europe, we have 2,500 hospitals that have a microbiology lab. So that is sort of the size, and say 1,500, 2,000 in the US, because it's more centralized there for these type of testing. So if you take this type of customer and you look at blood cultures, if you are a 24/7 lab, actually one system could sustain running all their blood cultures over a year basis. When we then go into other menu expansion, as we plan to do, for instance, isolates and urine, then we might need another system at that side. But we really build it to be a high throughput workhorse in a sense in those hospitals. And we really have very, very clear focus group or primary customer group for our first product. ASTar is built in a modular fashion. So if we decide going forward that we want to place it on perhaps lower throughput hospitals, it's a very, very good architecture to do that. But of course, not decided yet. We're still focusing on our key customers as initially, at least.
One very final question, then I hand over. given the very clear value proposition to hospitals and patients and doctors, physicians, why have I not seen health economic data out from? I haven't seen it. Maybe I have missed it. It should be fairly easy to do the math on this and show that this is a slam dunk to buy this system.
And I think, in a sense, it has been done. So on one of the slides, I actually described 3 independent health economic studies. Of course, at that time, you didn't have rapid AST available. So what you did was you took the fastest traditional system, and then you had a high number of staff around it to really make all the steps as fast as possible. And they could manage to squeeze that down and save 24 hours in time saving compared to the regular method. Of course, you can never do that in a lab. It would be too costly and ineffective. But what those studies have shown is a dramatic reduction in mortality. So you can see around 40%. You can also see that when you can go from the initial broad spectrum treatment, I mean, when you look at sepsis treatment today in Europe, US, hospitals typically have 4 or 5 main selection of the sort of treating criteria, focused on if you have a respiratory infection, might be pneumonia, or if you have a bladder infection, might be E. coli. And those 5 different regimes then correspond to typically at least 2 different antibiotics or antimicrobials that you give intravenously to the patient every 6 to 8 hours. And if you have rapid diagnostic, you can much faster de-escalate and remove some of these quite heavy antibiotics, and that reduces antimicrobial resistance, which is a huge cost saver and, of course, a huge reduction in drive for antimicrobial resistance. So that has also been shown. And I think for the hospital incentive, I think what's the most important just from the financial standpoint is that you could also show that you can save on average 2 days in the intensive care bed. And of course, as you know, first of all, during the pandemic, we see that we have too few intensive care beds. So of course, if you can free up space because you have a rapid test, that increases the capacity in the hospital. But 2 days in intensive care dorm is a dramatic time saving. So there are independent studies that has indicated this. Accelerate Diagnostic, that are a bit earlier than us, has also started to do so. Of course, we are planning our own health economic studies, because in the end, you typically have to prove it on your system under a clinical setting. But I agree with you, there are strong supporting evidence that providing this would help the patient, the society, and save money for the hospital. So that's why I'm looking very positive to the future of these of our systems really coming out.
Brilliant answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, hello, this is Steen. First of all, thank you for a good presentation, and thank you to Morten for stealing all my questions. First, but I have a few left here on my page as well. First, we talked about pricing. I didn't hear anything about, a ballpark estimate for the system price. Just to get a sense of where it could, how much it could disrupt the hospital labs budget and etc.
Right. No, so and I didn't disclose it really. When you look at pricing for these type of instruments, I would say that you typically see somewhere in the order of 100,000 euro, depending on tender offers. If you look at mass spectrometry, which has really been implemented in every single European lab over the last 10 years, providing identity, not susceptibility, there you typically see a price point of 1.7, 1.8, 780,000 euros. So when you look at this type of high throughput system, I would say that you find it in the range of sub 100,000 to sub 200,000 euro. And it depends a little bit on the throughput, and therefore also depends a little bit on the size of the hospital. I mean, typically what you see today is that many of the larger labs would like to see a radiant rental model. So you have a lot of sample volumes, you basically amortize the system cost over consumable volume for 3 to 4 years. Whilst you also see some university hospitals where have different financial settings typically want to do a cash-based direct sales model to really save money on the patients directly. So the business models or purchasing model differs a little bit, but I would say that that's a ballpark number without giving the precise number for Astar.
Okay. In connection with that, where do you see your, your strongest IP? Is that on the system or on the kit?
As I said, we have 23 patent families, and they cover not just the system, of course, also the kit, but also some parts of aspect, our consumables. We have some very unique technology on how we produce our consumables. You see this disc on the image. And if you look at that image, you can see that, maybe not in this one, but you have a sort of a frosted lid. There we have unique technology to enable us to have gas permeability, meaning letting air out but keeping water in. And you can also adjust gas permeability for bacteria. And this is technology really deep within the company, build up over a number of years. We will not patent that technology ever because we rather keep it as a sort of a company secret. But I would say that our patent spreads quite evenly around system, consumables, some manufacturing techniques. And then, of course, one important part of the intellectual property is all our software algorithms, how we analyze the samples, how we build that up. And that is, of course, something that's proprietary no matter what. So you don't file a patent for it, you just keep it as a secret within the company. So I would say that it is quite evenly distributed around the various parts of the system, consumables, and software.
Okay. Then I want to move on to the launch and the launch preparations and the actual launch. What kind of performance indicators should we look for there, or are you going to report on, and which one would be the most important to look for in your opinion, and besides revenue, of course?
Yeah, so I would say that when we look at the initial phase where we really put the systems out, I mean, as we plan and hope to do on really key hospitals, that will, of course, be the first indicator that would be how satisfied they are with the system. I mean, that would be the first phase. Are they happy with the system? Do it perform as accordingly? I think when we move forward from that point, I would say that one big driver would be overall usage, throughput of the system. How many samples will you put into the system? Because overall, long term, I think that will be the success part of the story. But apart from that, I would be guessing that you look at all the general things you see in this. How many placements do you have, overall feedback, and then, of course, throughput of the consumables. So nothing that sets us apart really from any other similar business model. And of course, we will comment on that coming up in quarterly reports. But again, we are not in launch phase yet. We're very close to it. So I think it's going to be a very interesting journey to follow over this year and the following years. There's definitely a big unmet need, and there really are not too many providers of systems out there. And my personal opinion is that ASTar clearly stands out as a good system. And I think for good reasons. We have been working so close with the customers really from day one. And I think that has been integral part of our development on how we should look at throughput, how we should look at usability, how we should look at panel. And I think that we have done a great job, actually, really connecting future customers way earlier than perhaps some of our other colleagues in the field have done, in my opinion.
Okay, and then just looking a few years ahead, can you remind us, have you said anything about break even or path to break even? Or I've looked at the recent consensus estimates, and they have you being profitable in 2023 or so.
Right. So, and we as a company have not announced that. I would still say that I think that the analysts covering the company are doing a good job. And of course, what they say will be on their hand. But the reason we have not announced that yet is I think that we always focus on being long-term successful, not just with ASTar, but also as we announced the new product in development, which we think can dramatically shave off time and provide a huge value to Qlinea and the shareholders. And we really want to focus, because the break-even to me is you can reach break-even in any number of ways. Either you sort of dial down in R&D efforts and really sort of capitalize and consolidate the first product. I still think that if you are in this type of environment, but we see that the need is big today and it's growing, I personally would like to be aggressive, as we have other technologies as well, and I would like to push them forward to launch. Of course, that will consume money for sure, but I think the overall success of the company will be multiplied by doing so. So that's why we haven't really announced it, because it's so linked to the strategy we as a company sort of decide on and look on. But From a high level, I think the analysts covering the company so far are doing a good job, if that provides some guidance.
Yes, it sounded like you will decide on a strategy later on, and we could expect some targets being announced later on.
That might happen. We're still discussing this within the board and how we'll do. We'll try to be as transparent as possible with sales. I think that's a good idea. And then we'll come back to see exactly what we decide upon there. But I will not put it down sort of a date on where we disclose or not disclose that. But from a commercial perspective, we'll try to be as transparent as possible to really follow the progress of the company.
Okay, thank you. In the interest of time, I think that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Then we are to the end of the session. I'd like to thank Lars, Morten, and Sting for your great questions. But first of all, thank you very much, Jonas, for your great presentation and your very interesting answer to all the questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.